Welcome to Wavemakers, the podcast where we dive into the stories of bold thinkers, trailblazers, and innovators who are making waves in their communities, industries, and beyond. Together, we'll explore the ideas, challenges, and victories of people who are shaping the future. At Wavemakers, we bring you thought-provoking conversations with those who are pushing the boundaries, defying expectations, and creating impact in their own unique ways. While we're proudly produced by Rio Salado College, a place that values lifelong learning and community impact, this podcast isn't just about education. It's about real-world stories of passion, perseverance, and progress. So, if you're ready to dive deep into the big ideas and get inspired by those who are making waves, you're in the right place. Let's get started. Hi, everybody. I'd like to welcome you back to Wavemakers. Today, we are bringing in another student to talk to us about her experience with Rio. And actually, her experience is extremely long-standing. Alysa, you want to introduce yourself to everyone and maybe let them know when you started with Rio and why?
My name is Alysa, and I took my first course from Rio Salado in 2006, so it's been almost 20 years now. And I started with Rio because I was actually a teacher at the time, a Spanish teacher, and I needed to take a certain number of courses in order to keep up my teaching license. And so I was a new mom and had little ones at home, and Rio Salado was perfect for me to be able to complete the courses and keep learning and growing and maintaining my teaching license while they were sleeping.
That's great. I know as a student myself, I often took advantage of that sleeping time to get some studying in. That is for sure. But you were then balancing, motherhood and keeping up with that. But then when you decided to go back to school, still balancing motherhood, but the kids maybe a little bit older and no longer, needing as much attention, you turned back to Rio. Can you tell me when you returned to school, what was going on in your life and why you decided to take that leap?
Yes, but before fully answering that question, there is kind of an intermediate step. When I, after teaching, I realized that 30-something children all at once was too much for this introverted soul. And so I started doing a little bit of career exploration actually through Rio Salado. And so I took Spanish medical interpretation, both as career exploration, and it also helped me keep up my teaching license. And so I had done that, and then in 2020, when I decided to do nursing, honestly, it was not even a question of where I was going to do the prerequisites, and I'll explain why in a minute. But, with choosing where I would go to nursing school, that was definitely something that I researched and thought about a lot and weighed everything out. But with where I would do the prerequisites, it was not even I just knew I was going to do them at Rio Salado. And the reasons why are because, when I did those courses many years previous, so that was 14 years later when I took my first course from Rio in 2006. It was now 2020. And I decided to go to nursing school and wanted to become a nurse. And there's a lot of prerequisites. Some of mine had expired, like I'd taken biology. I had to retake biology. And then a lot of them were new courses that I hadn't done earlier in life. And so I knew that the only way for me to be able to get all of these very difficult courses done and still take care of my family and, both emotionally and also financially, to be able to keep working, the only way I could do that is if I had the huge amount of flexibility that Rio Salado gives. And when I say flexibility, I mean not just in the sense of, hey, I can study and take tests even if I'm traveling and, the many things that can happen in life and squeezing in studying and tests and everything in, those whatever hours worked for me. I had to put the work in, but the flexibility of when I did that work was flexible, but it was also the pacing because, for example, in the summertime when my children were out of school, I didn't want to be taking rigorous maybe one rigorous course, but not 2 or 3 or 4 rigorous courses. And so I could time everything because Rio Salado has these frequent start dates. I could layer and time everything. So I was able to get a lot of courses done, but with timing and pacing exactly what fit to my life. And so that's why I didn't even look anywhere else, because I knew that Rio Salado could give me that flexibility in pacing and in when I put the hard work in.
I love how you said it would fit into your life, because that's something so many of our students talk about. We have students who are degree seeking, or maybe they're getting a credential, or like you, taking prerequisites or taking a course they need to fill in a gap for an educational journey that's going to take them elsewhere. But for right now, this is where they need to be. And I love how you said it was going to fit into your life. That makes so much sense. You mentioned that big gap between being your first time taking classes at Rio and the second time, and for two totally different purposes. Were there any doubts or fears? Your family is in a different cycle, in a different time of their lives. Did that, bring any doubts about, okay, should I do this now? Or what finally made you say, yep, now I'm going to do it?
I laugh because, I was scared out of my mind. I was scared that I wouldn't be able to manage it all. I was scared that the courses, I always wanted to do medical from a young age. I didn't have the belief in myself or the academic preparation to take those. When I did my first bachelor's degree earlier in life, it took me a while to build up the courage because the classes are so difficult. They call them weed out classes for a reason. And I just was really, really scared. The fears about taking care of my family, those I was able to work through by a lot of careful planning. So I did a lot of preparation before I did this. I had a lot of food in the freezer. I taught my children how to do their own laundry. There was a lot of preparation that went into that. And then I have a great partner that supported me and took on a lot. And so that part was solved through that. And then for the fears about what if I'm choosing the wrong path, or what if I'm not able to do well in this path, those were there the whole entire time. But the way that I face them is, that being courageous is when you're scared and you do it anyway. And, I recognize that life is never fully in our control, and all we can do is do our best guess of what the next step should be. And it got to a point where I was like, okay, this is my best guess. And I'm never going to know fully how it's going to turn out and if it's safe or if it's the best thing. But I just have to start moving down a path. And if it's seeming like it's not the right path, I can learn from it and redirect. But I got to a point where I was like, the worst thing I can do is to stay in the same spot because I'm scared. So I started thinking about how the pain of not taking risk for me was worse than taking the risks and have it not turn out how I hoped.
That risk, that step, so many adult learners talk about that. Can I do this? Am I going to be able to do this? How am I going to balance it all? I think I've heard you talk previously when we shared about just the organization, the dedication, the time management. What steps did you take during that first Spanish course to be sure that you were setting yourself up for success?
Well, I'd like to say something about adult learners. I think, one of my fears was that I'm older and my memory isn't as amazing as I was when I was younger. That was one of the many 500 things I was scared about. And, I had a friend that had been to law school, and she said, I was so jealous of the adult learners, the older students, because they had so much more organization skills and life skills built up. And so I started to see, okay, I have certain disadvantages as an older adult learner, but I have other advantages. So with organization, to get set up for going back to school, for nursing, because Spanish medical interpretation, I did that in between. I mean, I would have to look to know the exact dates, but I would say somewhere around 2010 to 2015. And so that was a way that I kept my teaching license up and kept career exploration and kind of putting my toe in medical and Spanish interpretation. And then several years later in 2020 is when I decided to go to nursing school. And what I mean by organization is kind of, I mentioned having food in the freezer, but also having systems and procedures. Like, we delegated out who was going to do exactly what, who was going to grocery shop, who was going to do the laundry, and how we were going to do it. And, like I said, teaching my children how to do their own laundry. So there was definitely some extra independence with the children. And then there was, dividing up. I was going to have less time, so I could take on less. And so my partner took on more. And so really, I think getting your support system involved and just becoming very, very efficient. Unfortunately, you do have to make sacrifices. So for example, my friends, I told them, I love you dearly. I will not get to see you as often. And so I made sure that I saw all of my friends right before I started each big step. If I knew I was going to be very busy with prerequisite courses for the next coming year and a half, or right before starting nursing school, I made sure I saw all of my close friends. And so, there's enacting your, trying to get help from your support system, and then trying to set expectations with friends and family that you just won't be able to do as much or see them as often because you do have to make sacrifices. And then enacting systems and procedures in your life that make things automated. So for example, one of the things that I actually started doing in 2020 because of this journey, and I still do to this day, is instead of having to keep everything in my head that I do every week, I have it on this weekly list, including the days that I usually do it. For example, watering the plants. Instead of trying to remember, have I watered the plants? What day? I just have this list that every day I batch cook on Sundays. I water the plants on Sundays. I do this thing on Tuesdays. And if I'm not able to get to it that way, it still is on my list. And then I have this space on my weekly to-do list where I leave for flexible things that come up. And so just really getting organized about what do you need to do every week to keep your life or your family's life organized, and then writing it down and having a weekly to-do list that keeps you on track so that you're not keeping it all in your head, because that's more stress and time trying to keep it all in your head.
Okay, this is ending up to be a wonderful lesson in organization, and I love this conversation because we must be kindred spirits. While this was all the preparation for doing that academic journey, can you just share a little bit about what that looked like starting in 2020? Did you have, 5 classes you had to take? Did you have 4? Did you take one at a time? Did you delve into 2 at a time? What was that timeline for you?
Yeah, so when I took my first courses back in 2006 and in the 2010s, it was just one at a time, and it was really easy to figure out the start and the end dates. When I did nursing school, I needed to get a lot of courses done all at once. What really worked for me was I staggered the start dates. So, for example, I started with a really easy course because I needed a confidence booster. And so I started with human development and got my confidence up with that one and just did that one for a few weeks. And then I layered on chemistry, which would be challenging, but it was the first layer of chemistry. And so, I planned it out so that I could build my confidence by not taking on too much. And I got a lot of good advice that way of just start easy to build your confidence and also to kind of refine the systems and procedures in your life and your support network for everyone to have time to get used to it and then ramp up. And that worked really, really well for me to start slowly to moderately and then ramp up with intensity. And it's that layering of classes, like when I knew, okay, this one's going to be in peak midterm, so I'm not going to start a course right then. I'll start maybe a week after, So I didn't take courses, and this is why Rio Salado worked so incredibly well for me for my nursing prereqs, because I wasn't limited to start a course in January, finish it beginning of May. so for example, I could, sometimes I was taking 4 courses a semester, but because one would finish and the other one had started, the way it was layered, I was only taking 3 courses at a time, but I was able to finish 4 in a semester. It's tricky to explain, but it worked because it's this Tetris that you can do with start dates and timing. Okay, this is going to be final season for this course, so it worked out really well to layer it that way.
And I think, too, you can also just look at your family schedule and, okay, I know this is going to be going on with the family. Maybe I'm only in one course at this time, or, hey, we're going to plan a vacation. Let's try to work around that. I imagine that was a lot of planning and organizing and pulling out the calendar and just color. I don't know about you, but I color code mine.
Were you spying on me?
No, honestly, I really wasn't.
No, this is exactly what it was, and allowed me. Like there was one summer, that we had saved up so that we could finally take a few special trips with our children when they were all old enough to remember and they were in high school, and then the pandemic hit, and so we couldn't travel with our children, and we were so worried because our oldest was, going to leave the nest in a few years. And so the way it turned out is that we could finally take a couple of special trips with our children, but all in one year. Because I was about to start nursing school. My daughter was about to go off to university. We finally could travel pandemic-wise. And so that's exactly what I did. That summer of traveling, I was only taking one course, and I was taking my really intense courses right up until the day they got out of school. And then I was only taking one course of that traveling summer. And I mean, that is exactly what I did. Was I was able to just titrate it and plan it exactly towards maximizing my time with my family and still doing this ambitious goal of all of these difficult science courses for the nursing prerequisites.
I think a lot of people, as their adult learners, look at the idea of going back to school, and you've just outlined beautifully how they can make it work. I love that you share that. Let's move forward a little bit. You finished the prerequisites. What did you do next, and where did your training from Rio play a role in the future you have today?
So what I did next was apply to nursing school, and the credits from Rio Salado transferred beautifully and also prepared me really, really well for the difficult nursing courses that I took in nursing school. I felt very well prepared. And so from there, I was able to, it was a journey. I won't go into all of the details, but I'll just say it was a rough journey to find the right fit in a job. That's not easy, and it's messy, and it took a while. But I was able to find a job that really fit with my health, and which was my top concern. I have some health particularities that I needed, and I was able to find something. And one of the most beautiful things is that the Spanish medical interpretation is something that I get to use on a daily basis. And it was great because I could, just right away start with that instead of trying to, eventually get that, which I could have done it the opposite way, but it was so nice to have it in place. And then when I started as a nurse, I was able to communicate directly with patients in Spanish. We always, if we have a patient that speaks Spanish as the strongest, most comfortable language, we do Spanish interpretation, and it's wonderful, but it does have its limitations because it takes extra time, and it's also just not the same as that direct and deeper communication that you can have when you're speaking directly in the most comfortable language for a patient. So that has been really beautiful for me to use the Spanish medical interpretation, and to get to use it from day one was really exciting.
Can you think of a moment in your job when speaking Spanish made a real difference in that interaction with the patient?
So I'm pretty terrible at coming up with key moments. And so, I will just say that I have had people express, I'm so grateful to have found you, that I can explain this to you so well, and that, I've just had people express gratitude that we can have that communication directly. And I think, you can see it on people's faces that they're just so grateful to be understood. And that's what we all want. We all want to be understood and to have people see us. And, it can be done through interpretation, but I think there's a more direct, deeper, easier connection when it's direct instead of filtered through interpretation.
I think it's a skill today that's going to be valued more and more. And because I think fewer people, quite honestly, are taking the languages and getting that fluency, especially for a level of being able to do medical interpretation. So first of all, thank you for doing that. I really appreciate it. And I think a lot of our community will say the same thing. Looking at your nursing career, what's the biggest lesson that you've learned since stepping into this career? And was it and is it what you would hope for back before you even dared even thinking going into a medical career?
It is really, really hard choosing a career path when you don't know exactly what it's going to look like. And I think the only reason why I felt like I could choose nursing when I really didn't know what it looked like is because I had so many people tell me it is such a broad field that you'll be able to find your niche. Now, I think I never could have imagined how tricky it can be to find that. I just can't say enough how messy I think life is. And so I really, want to get that across that, life is not fully in our control and we can do our very best and then have things not turn out. But once again, I go back to that having the piece of, but I tried.
Yes.
And I did something and I was brave. And so even if it didn't turn out how it thought, I made some reference to when I graduated from nursing school, it being a journey to find the right fit. And there was a moment that I was really scared. What if I did all of this work and sacrifice and then it doesn't turn out? And a lot of that had to do with my health difficulties. And, being a new nurse is extremely stressful, especially bedside. And usually you can't get hired outside of bedside until you have that experience. And so, it's messy, it's tricky trying to figure out what a career is going to be like when you haven't actually done it. And especially medical because everything is so protected as it should be for health information, getting in and shadowing can be really difficult to get into. But I think talking about other careers, because I think with nursing, the main thing that you can do, because shadowing is hard to, try to do shadowing, but I think the main thing that you can do is really talking to people, like, what are the hardest things about your job? Telling them your particularities. Do you think I would be able to handle? What does it look like? What do you think the challenges would be for me? I know those are tricky questions for people to ask, but it really helped me a lot. And then with other fields, I think shadowing is huge because then you get to see what it actually looks like day to day. And I think that's the most powerful way to figure out what a job's actually going to be like is shadowing.
That is such a great lesson for all learners of all ages to grasp onto and to know that there's that period of exploration that they can take and that they should take. What I wonder is, what have your children taken from all this? They've truly been coming up and watching you go through the different career paths and going back to school. I know when I went back to school, my kids were kind of like, wait, Mom's doing what? Like, we're what? So how did that transpire in your house, and what do you think they've taken? What lessons maybe have they learned?
Well, I'm going to be that person and flip your question and say what I learned from them, because I have, and the reason I'm flipping it is because I have no idea what they took away from it. But what I learned from them is how to support other people. They, when I'd be stressed or worried, they'd be like, Mama, you can do this. You've got this. Like they would cheerlead me on and I would cheerlead them on in their pursuits. We would be stressed out of our minds and have hard moments and apologize to each other and
Yep.
repair. And just that, and when they would be so funny when I would have a success. I'd be like, I just barely scraped by with, a good grade in this class. And they're like, we never doubted you, Mom. We knew. And they would joke about, you're so silly. We knew you were going to get a good grade, or we knew you were going to get into nursing school. They just, and they were just so incredibly supportive about taking on, their children. We didn't give them too much. We gave them each one new responsibility. Well, I guess two, because they all started doing their own laundry. So, they were doing their own laundry, and then we gave them one new responsibility. So my oldest she was going to do a grocery shopping trip a week, and another child was cooking something for the family once a week. So it was very, very appropriate helping out. And I think it really gave us all a team. Like we really, really pulled together as a team and supported each other. And I think the difference here is that in the past, it had more been about the parents always supporting the children. And it kind of gave them a chance to be leaders. They weren't taking on too much work. Like I said, it was just a little bit more responsibility than they had before, which was good for them for growing in responsibility and organization as they get older. But they got a chance to be a supporter and a cheerleader too. So I learned a lot from them about how to support other people.
So those lessons that you've learned from them and that you've learned yourself over the past couple of years, what advice would you give for someone listening who's unsure about being able to juggle school and work and family? What would you tell them?
The first thing that I would say is that chances are you can do it. And what I mean by chances are is that, there may be some adjustments. So let me say it again, you can do it. It's just a question of what adjustments may need to be made, because you can't add something big into your life. I don't know if you've seen the demonstration of the big rocks and then the sand. Taking even one class is a rock in your life. It's not little pieces of sand, Maybe adding in an extra exercise class a week, that's a little bit of sand. It's a 45-minute exercise class. But taking a class is going to be, even one is going to be, 10 hours a week or whatever it ends up being, 8 to 10 hours a week, depending on how difficult the courses are. And so you have to make changes in order to make room for that rock. Or if you were doing what I was doing at a certain point of getting 4 intense courses done in a semester, that's several rocks that you have to make fit. So you can do it. It's a matter of, I think, 2 major things. It's that organization and preparation, I guess 3, and then also a support system if you are able to, if there's anyone that can support you a little bit, to accept a little bit more help than you would normally. And then the third thing is working on believing in yourself, because our brain supports us in what we're thinking. So if I'm telling myself this class is too hard, I can't do it, my brain's going to support that conclusion. Whereas if I tell myself this course is very hard and I can put in the work every day to be able to be successful in this course, and I might have to retake it, and if that's what has to happen, that's what has to happen, but I can do this. It's a matter of how. And something that was really helpful for me was really just thinking about one day at a time, sometimes a week, but 1 to 7 days at a time, just getting through that. Because if you try to think about the whole journey, like for example, with me going to nursing school, if I tried to think about the whole entire journey, all of the prerequisites, and then getting through nursing school and then finding a job. I did it a couple of times and I ended up in the corner crying. So, it's more that you have to think like, what's the next best step, and try to focus on one step at a time. And you might have an idea of what the big, long journey is that you want, and you might not yet, but really try to focus on what is the next best step, and then do the things that you need to, meaning practicing believing in yourself, organizing yourself, all of that. And then that slow and steady start versus trying to jump in something that that is maybe too much, and then you might have a rough start just because you took on too much.
A lot of that goes back to that growth mindset. Like you said, just telling yourself, yes, it's hard, but yes, I can do it. I have a friend that we start every day. We can do hard things. Whenever we talk to each other, we can do hard things. And I agree. Just making that step forward makes such a difference.
Yes, and there's not something wrong with you if you are having obstacles and difficulties. It's not a sign that you are not cut out for this. It's a sign that you're doing a hard thing.
Mm-hmm. We hope that as adults, those lessons we have from the past can help us as we go through with our futures and make that step. Because I don't know about you, but every now and then I'm like, what do I want to be when I grow up? And hey, I've got 3 adult children at home. And so it continues. It's never ending.
It's true. And I think that that's part of the beauty of being a grower and a learner is that you can always see like, well, I love this and I would love to do more of this. And, it's beautiful. And at the same time, I have to remind myself to focus sometimes because you can't do it all.
But we try.
Yes, we do.
So if you had to look back at all this and this journey you've been on, was there one moment that you just really realized, oh my gosh, I did this?
As funny as it is, for me, that moment was actually in the dark tunnel of having invested so much and having not found a good fit for my health in nursing, because I had to grieve the fact that I don't have control of how this is going to turn out.
Right.
And through a dear friend who happens to be my sister, she was there for me in that very, very difficult moment. And she helped me see that I would never regret having taken that risk, even if it didn't turn out how I wanted. And that I would always have that, the medical knowledge and everything that I learned from the whole entire journey was already helping me in my personal life, not to mention, that maybe it could work out career-wise, even though I was really discouraged in that moment. And so I think that moment was really the key moment. When I called her, it was a Friday night, and I was distraught and scared. And she helped me see that no matter what, it was a success story because I was brave and I did a really, really hard thing and I took a risk, and no one can take the knowledge away from me that I earned through a lot of hard work.
And that's a beautiful, and I'm so glad that somebody was there just to be able to remind you. And I hope you see it every day in the work you're doing.
Thank you. I do. And now, now it's really a honor and a sacred responsibility to be part of a person's health journey. And I'm just really, really grateful for it.
Well, we're really grateful for you sharing this story with us. Real listeners, I hope you've enjoyed this podcast and have walked away as inspired as I have and continue to come back to listen here at Wavemakers as we follow students and community members on their journey. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.